Steve Yabsley, BBC Radio Bristol.
Hello and a warm welcome to Tuesday's programme. Steve taking you through till 3 o'clock. An interesting programme today as we look at Gene Pitney. My guest in the first hour of the show is Michael Turner. He's been on the programme in the past because he's travelled extensively, and by extensively I mean worldwide, following in the footsteps of Sir Francis Drake in the past, who he greatly admires. Right. And he's charted his voyages and his journeys on land. He's an expert on that. But in addition to Sir Francis Drake, he's also, came as a surprise to me, a big fan of Gene Pitney.
Wow.
And he's written a book about Gene Pitney. And he met Gene Pitney on numerous occasions. And, of course, Gene Pitney had a string of hits in the 60s into the 70s and was very successful. Also, do you know that he wrote Bouncing Ball for Bobby V?
Did he?
And other hit songs as well. He was a songwriter as well as a performer. But 24 Hours from Tulsa is his big one, I suppose.
Yeah. Was he a fan of Sir Francis Drake? Do you know Gene Pitney?
Do you know? I will ask Michael that because he'll probably better tie all the ends together.
Yes.
If he wasn't, he wouldn't have mentioned it because it would have been impolite. But this is a comprehensive look at Gene Pitney's life. And Michael says it's the only book that charts his whole life because there were books written about Gene Pitney when he was alive.
Yeah.
But he died of a heart attack in Cardiff, and no books have been written since. Which encompass his whole life.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I liked his song with Mark Almond.
Oh yes.
Great song.
So we'll have some of his music later on. Michael Turner is my guest in the first hour of the show. He's been on the programme before talking about his incredible travels in the footsteps and wake of Sir Francis Drake, a man he's very interested in and an expert on. But today he's going to have a brief word about that, but also going to talk about his wonderful new book about Gene Pitney, who he saw live on several occasions and met as well. What a great singer-songwriter Gene Pitney was, and also an engineer, a producer, a remarkable man who died too young. So we're going to celebrate Gene Pitney on today's programme. Next up on the programme, we're going to talk about Gene Pitney with Michael Turner. Well, the time now is 26 minutes to 1, and I welcome into the studio my guest of the day. It's the wonderful traveller and writer and teacher, Michael Turner. Michael, thank you for coming in today.
A true delight.
Thank you so much for coming in. Michael's just returned from Mongolia. What were you doing in Mongolia?
I'm a very enthusiastic teacher after 37 years, and I collect pictures and make videos to enhance lessons at summer school for academic summer at Sidcot every summer in July and August.
I see.
And the children really appreciate the lessons because the teacher's brought his own material into the classroom.
Well, you do go that extra mile. We're going to talk about your Gene Pitney book, of course, in detail in a minute. But I want to talk about your extraordinary life over the years. I'm not sure where you were born. Where are you from originally, Mike?
Western-super-Mare.
Oh, so
the
you're
accent
local
gives
then.
It away.
Yeah, well, you never know. What about education? You went to teacher training college, did you, presumably?
Yes, down in the University of Chichester.
Okie dokie. Had you wanted to be a teacher from a very early age, or was it something you were pushed into by your parents?
When I was in year 10 at King Alfred School, Miss Lamb, the English teacher, said I would make a good teacher, but I left school with very, very poor grades. I was working on a building site when I left school.
Oh, right.
And I spent 7 years in the wilderness before I got into teacher training
Tell
college.
me about that wilderness period, Michael. What did you get up to?
Well, I was at Pontins, scrubbing saucepans and hanging curtains and delivering leaflets around Somerset, working on a kibbutz in Israel, Camp America. Rich, overweight children needed some sporting inspiration.
Well, you became a PE teacher in the end, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, I still teach PE.
And humanities and Spanish. How did you pick up the Spanish? How did that element of your skills come about?
Well, when you hire transport around Latin America to photograph Sir Francis Drake, you have to speak some Spanish. So I was motivated to learn a foreign language because when you go draking in Latin America, you end up speaking Spanish in about 20 countries.
Yeah, and a lot of people, as you go away from the main cities and towns, wouldn't have a grasp of English, would they, I suppose?
No, they don't.
Now, your interest in Sir Francis Drake has really dominated your life, and in a good way, because it's allowed you, it's been a device, a key to the most extraordinary travels. I mean, Sir Francis Drake was one of history's greatest seafarers, no doubt about it. When did your interest begin in him?
When I was 8 years old at St Andrew's School in Burnham-on-Sea.
What happened?
Well, we heard different Drake stories every year belonging to the same man, ending in a fairy tale scenario. And I thought all these stories belong to one man. And I saw his picture in a fortress in Mexico in 1980, and I was thrilled by coincidence to be on the same piece of turf as my schoolboy hero, that I thought I'll do something different, not just visit another temple, tomb, monastery, market day, So I've been draking ever since.
Yeah, draking is the official term, if you weren't sure. And you've been on an incredible journey. I mean, let me just mention some of the places you've visited over the last 30 or 40 years. Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, Spain, Portugal, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Venezuela, USA, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Senegal, Mauritania, Morocco, the Canary Islands, Chile, Philippines, Indonesia, Guadeloupe, St. Kitts, British Virgin Islands, Gambia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Libya, South Africa, Cuba, Grand Cayman, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, the Azores, France, nearer to home, the Netherlands. I mean, mentioned all of them. I mean, you really have extraordinarily devoted your life to these travels, haven't you?
Well, I've done some different travels lately. Since I last saw you, I've been collecting pictures for the children in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Turkey, Greece, Albania, Italy, Panama again and again, Mongolia, charity work in Kenya, and I was a Drake speaker on a cruise, a saga cruise, for 26 days, giving 6 Drake slideshows between Acapulco and Barbados.
Well, you're a lucky devil. I'd love to go on one of those saga ships. I've just seen they launched the new one, which looks fantastic, but it's out of my price range, I'm afraid. You travelled the world in Drake's wake, as you say, in Drake's footsteps, but this was all based on your meticulous research, wasn't it? Because you looked into where he'd been to start with in considerable detail.
Well, when I read stories about Drake, I was exasperated, thinking, what does this place look like? Where is it? Where on earth is Crab Island? Where did the mule train robbery take place near Nombre de Dios? And we've done some archaeology because I've discovered where the mule train was robbed, and we found mule shoes, weaponry, we found lead balls during the battle. Haven't found the treasure. But I would like to say, tomorrow night in the United States of America, a program that I took part in for the Discovery Channel called Chasing Sir Francis Drake's Fortune, on a series called Expedition Unknown, receives its world premiere. So the program will be aired in Britain very shortly, and I'm interviewed at Buckland Abbey last December the 11th. Unfortunately, I could not go to Panama for the week's filming because I was struck with pneumonia and a pulmonary embolism as a result of visiting Mongolia, where I began writing the Gene Pitney book.
Well, I tell you what, all this travel, I'm surprised you're still alive. Have you ever had any hairy moments in the places you visited?
Yeah, I had a gripping situation in Colombia in 1984. I was strangled and I was knifed in the ear.
Oh dear.
I was strangled elsewhere in another country, and I've been robbed and beaten up in jail 3 times. So apart from that, everything's turned out very well.
What about illness? I mean, you just mentioned that bug you picked up a moment ago. Have you had a dodgy tummy in some of these places? Yeah,
I had dysentery in Egypt in 1978, but getting pneumonia last September in Mongolia with the blood clot was very debilitating.
Well, I do admire your fortitude. We should mention the late Master Merchant Mariner Raymond Acre, because he helped you considerably with plotting courses, didn't he?
Well, he was unique. You can talk to authors on Sir Francis Drake, but he was a man with great vision. He would reconstruct through artwork scenarios and situations of Drake. For example, his stockade and his sojourn in California, all drawn. Same with the ships that he would reconstruct. And he guided me around the world.
And you, as you alluded to a moment ago, discovered things anew along the way, verification of anchorages and places ashore. Just through being there, you went that little bit further, didn't you?
Well, you can go to archives and read all the books, but when you go out in the field, you realise that the hermit's house on the island of Brava is still there, when authors wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah. Well, I forget what the word is. But you do take photographs, don't you? You take a hell of a lot of slide photographs.
Photojournalism. I got 20,000 slides, about 14,000 are for Sir Francis Drake.
And you've written books about Drake as well, haven't you? And if people want more details about that side of you, they should look at your website, indrakeswake.co.uk. I got a feeling you also met Nelson Mandela at some point, didn't you? What was that to do with?
The best day of my life. I was the first ordinary person in the world from a foreign country to meet him. And I was so lucky because I was photographed in the newspaper because of that stroke of luck that I had in being photographed by the world's press in his house on February the 23rd, 1990.
How on earth did you end up there in the first place?
Well, I'm an author on human rights, and I'm revamping the books this winter. And I showed the books to the 15-year-old chap at the gate, and he let me in. And I was the only person in the garden who was not in the media. I was the unique school teacher.
Extraordinary. I bet you treasure that photo, don't you?
I carry it with me.
Fantastic. Are your travels going to continue with Drake, or have you? I mean, you've done everything, haven't you? Been everywhere that he went.
Yeah, I've virtually done everything. I'm going back to Santo Domingo at Christmas because it's a fantastic Drake ambiance. He captured the city. It's a kilometre square. It's full of buildings that Drake was still recognised. It's a great place to chillax and maybe enhance the writing. I've had a children's Drake book published, which I use in school. And the children like that. And as it's summer school international at Sidcutt, those books go all around the world when the kids go home.
And out of the dozens of countries you've visited and the hundreds of different sites you've been to over the last few years, what has been your favourite?
I love Tibet. It is so spiritual. The monasteries, the way they cook the food in these huge ovens made out of rocks, and the scenery and the drums and the big bangs, the gongs. It was a really outstanding experience being in Tibet.
Did Drake go to Tibet then?
No, he didn't. But I go to these places because I have a YouTube channel, Michael Turner, and on it there's several playlists. There's a Brunel playlist, there's a Francis Drake playlist, and there's a Turner's Travels playlist and a GCSE Geography playlist. So I try to put pictures into the different playlists to make the Michael Turner channel professional, diverse, unique and interesting.
Blimey, what an extraordinary traveller you are. Well, we want to talk about your other interest, which is the singer Gene Pitney. You've written a book about him. It's the first book which actually spans the entire life of Gene Pitney. And to put people in the mood, here's one of his big hits.
Dearest darling, I had to write to say that I won't be home anymore, 'cause something happened to me while I was driving home, and I'm not the same anymore. Oh, I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. I saw a welcoming light and stopped to rest for the night, and that is when I saw her as I pulled in outside of the small motel. She was there, and so I walked up to her, asked where I could get something to eat, and she showed me where. Oh, I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. She took me to the cafe. I asked her if she would stay. She said, okay. I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. The jukebox started to play, and nighttime turned into day. As we were dancing closely, all of a sudden I lost control as I held her charms, and I caressed her, kissed her, told her I'd die before I would let her out of my arms. Oh, I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. I hate to do this to you, but I love somebody new. What can I do when I can never go home again?
The unmistakable voice of Gene Pitney and 24 Hours from Tulsa. You're tuned to your local radio station, BBC Radio Bristol. My guest at the moment is Michael Turner, who not only is fascinated by Sir Francis Drake and has travelled the world celebrating his voyages and his travels, he has also, since a young man, been very interested in Gene Pitney. And he's written a wonderful book, Charting the Life of Gene Pitney. And it is the first ever biography to span the entire life of Gene Pitney. It's stacked out with photos, many of them taken by Michael himself. Let's go back in time then, Michael. What is your earliest recollection of a piece of music by Gene Pitney?
Somewhere in the country, a friend of mine up the road, Alan Simpson, and I were talking about it when I was about 13 years old. And then people would say, "Oh, you look like Gene Pitney." I bought a few records of the greatest hits. And eventually I got to see him. I couldn't see him at the Webbington, near where I live, because I couldn't get there.
Yeah, reading in your book, I didn't actually realise he played at a relatively small venue like the Webbington.
He played everywhere, so he was accessible to everybody in rural areas.
Yeah, tell me about that first time you saw him, because you missed the last train home, didn't you?
Yeah, it was at Croydon. I was a student teacher, and I was going to get out of my seat to catch the last train. Then he sang Angelica, and I couldn't get out of the seat, and I ended up sleeping on the table in the waiting room of the station. And I've been seeing him ever since.
How many times did you see him live?
20 times at least. Plus, I was in his house once, about 6 fan club conventions.
You weren't burglaring it, you actually were invited in there.
Well, I knocked on the door.
Where was his house?
Summers, Connecticut, and his widow still lives there.
I see. Well, let's talk a little bit about Gene Pitney then. His childhood was in Connecticut. He was in Rockville, wasn't he, to start with?
That's a great name for a budding singer.
Tell me a little bit about his early days, because he was interested in music from quite a young age, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was told at school that he was a good singer, and he was trained and encouraged to speak and sing in a various pitch.
Yeah, he had a big fan of doo-wop music, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right. Groups called the Crows, the black groups, and he formed a group with the Genials, and he recorded homemade, homespun records with local black groups in Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah, his voice was extraordinary, though, wasn't it? I mean, nobody sounds like Gene Pitney.
No, some people say you either love him and you don't, and he said, yes, you either love my voice or you don't. But the voice is unique. I think it's one of the best voices the planet's ever heard. And I still love listening to his songs, and it's so sad that he's not in concert today. Yeah,
he's got such a powerful voice. He signed to the Music Hall label, didn't he, in 1961? And then the hits started, didn't they, for him?
Well, the Music Hall label was set up for him. It was a branch of United Artists, but they didn't want to bury a new name amid all the pop stars like Frank Sinatra, so they created a new label for him.
How did his career pan out then from those early days?
He accrued a collection of hits in the United States, and the Bridgehead song, which fortunately you played 24 Hours from Tulsa, was his association song for Britain. He called an association song the first song in a country that people would always remember him for, because it was the biggest hit that struck the ears of the widest range of the populace at the time.
Well, just looking at his hits, I mean, 16 top 40 hits in the US, 4 in the top 10. In the UK, he had 22 top 40 hits, 11 in the top 10. I mean, you forget how successful he was.
Well, he told me on the telephone, because I spoke to him many times on the phone, that he was more popular in Britain than anywhere else. Australia was probably second. The Americans have more of a throwaway attitude culture, disposable. But Britain, they just hang on to their American rock and rollers with great reverence.
Tell me about his song Town Without Pity, because that was actually nominated for an Oscar, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was supplied to him, and he went to California to record it, and he was conducted and directed by Dmitri Tiomkin, the famous film composer. And that introduced Pitney to lots of famous people, and he was singing it at the Golden Globes in front of the likes of Marilyn Monroe, Burt Lancaster, John Wayne.
And I think the Oscar was actually won by Moon River, which is fair enough, because it's a great tune, but nonetheless to be nominated for an Oscar, to perform it at the ceremony, is quite an accolade, isn't it?
Yeah, and he was the first pop star to ever do that.
Fabulous.
And he said it was the most important song of his career, Town Without Pity, and it was the last song that he ever sung in his life in concert, which was in Cardiff.
He also, and I didn't know this until I read your book, wrote songs for others, and he wrote, well-known songs. He wrote Rubber Ball for Bobby Vee, didn't he?
And Marty Wilde and the Avons recorded it as well. So if only one artist had recorded it, would have got slightly higher up the charts. But Rubber Ball, a terrific song.
Yeah, so in those days, several artists would record the same song then, would they, or do a different version of it?
Yeah, but Pitney never subscribed to that. She Lets Her Hair Down Early in the Morning was done by Pitney and the Tokens in the late 60s, and Pitney said it tends to kill a song off if there's more than one artist
Yeah. Well, Cilla
Plugging at
Black
the same
used to
time.
cover a lot of Dionne Warwick tracks, didn't she? He also wrote He's a Rebel for the Crystals, which I was amazed by.
Yes, it was recorded by Darlene Love in the Blossoms because Phil Spector couldn't get back to New York to actually coach the Crystals to sing the song. But Pitney was asked to coach the Crystals on tour, which he was quite surprised by. He thought, I thought you'd already recorded the song.
Well, another song that he wrote that everyone will know, Hello Mary Lou by Ricky Nelson. I mean, that's a huge track you still hear from time to time.
Yes, Pitney was inspired by a song called Mary Mary Lou. And that's why you've got a second person's name on the credits, a man's name beginning with M. I can't pronounce it now. But Pitney had to pay him domestic royalties because he was accused of plagiarising. So that's an interesting story. But it was obviously a much better version. And Hello Mary Lou has been covered by a Mexican singer called Karina.
Now, the foreword is by Neil Sedaka, another great. Tell me how that came about, that connection.
Goodness, that really shook me rigid. I wrote to Neil Sedaka because I'd written his concert tour program at his request in 1996 and I wrote him a book, not as big as the Pitney book, but I gave him the book in Bristol and he lent it to his biographer, and I was mentioned 6 times in Sedaka's biography. So I asked Neil Sedaka, would he write a foreword? And I got all these questions coming my way. How are you going to market the book and all these other questions? And I thought, But the answers were sufficient, and he said yes, and he sent the foreword straight away. I'd only written 2 pages. I thought, my goodness me, this book's got to have to be good to warrant his name. And I want him to be pleased that he has forwarded the book. And fortunately, he's read the book, and he said I did a fantastic job, and he was very pleased that he contributed. So that was a bit of a apprehension when I first started out, because I had this foreword from him before I'd even written much.
Yeah,
and it
well,
just...
Neil Sedaka, another great, who's written songs for many artists over the years.
Yes, he has, and there's a crossover song with It Hurts to Be in Love.
Yeah, there's a connection. Just explain that connection.
Sedaka recorded It Hurts to Be in Love, written by Helen Miller and his long-time lyricist Howie Greenfield. But it was recorded in a studio which was not sanctioned or sponsored by RCA.
Yeah, they were quite strict in those days, weren't they, about who they could record with?
It was political, and although Sedaka did a fantastic rendition, it wasn't acceptable, and he had to re-record it, and the recording, in Sedaka's word, failed. It's rather brassy, tinny. Nothing to do with Sedaka, probably the ambience of the studio and the musicians. But when Don Kirshner, who was Sedaka's manager, offered it to Gene Pitney, Pitney said, that's a hit record, why are you offering it to me?
Yeah, and it was all the same backing, including, I see Neil Sedaka's piano on it and his backing vocals.
Hand claps.
Yeah, hand claps. And they just put Gene Pitney on it, and of course it was a big hit.
Yeah, Pitney took it to number 7. And Pitney and Sedaka said I could have had my career resurrected 10 years earlier if I'd have had that
he
song.
still made a bit of money, I'm sure, from the royalties. Pitney's career, of course, like every star's, went down for a bit, but then he had a renaissance in the late 80s. He recorded Something's Got a Hold of My Heart with Mark Almond, and that has a local connection, written by Roger Cook and Roger Greenaway.
And another local connection, because I watched Pitney sing that in Bristol at Colston Hall. He left Bristol that night and went into a recording studio in London the next day to record 2 takes of the different version of the song. And then when Pitney went home, Mark Almond and the engineers spliced it, cut it, chopped it and mixed it up, and it sounded as though the 2 singers were together.
Well, it's fantastic. He continued to tour frequently throughout his later life. He died in 2006. He was only 66, and he'd played in Cardiff the night before, hadn't he?
And the following night, he was going to be here in Bristol.
That's right.
And we all got our tickets refunded.
I was going to say that many people had their tickets, and what a tragedy, because nobody expected him to have a heart attack at that age, did they?
No, because he wasn't overweight, and every hotel had to have a gym and a swimming pool for him to improve his fitness.
Yeah, in
and
fact, in
maintain
your
his
book,
fitness.
there's photos of him wearing his tracksuit, which he used to wear sort of when he was off stage. He was sort of a sporty type in that regard.
Yes, that's right. It was a massive shock to us all, and it's very, very sad.
Yeah, you met him on several occasions. There was a few pictures of you in the book with various records with him. What was he like as a man?
Well, he could talk about anything. He was a great conversationalist. He was approachable, down to earth. And he said to me, I don't let money get in the way of doing the normal things in life. So he would stay in rustic accommodation and enjoy fishing trips He would take out the rubbish and try to repair a refrigerator instead of buying a new one. He was very much a hands-on technocrat.
Yeah, one thing I must emphasise is the marvellous photographs in the book. I mean, there really are unique photographs. The majority of them you've taken yourself. I mean, you had first-hand knowledge of him. You met him in person a lot of times. People, fans of Pitney's, wouldn't have seen these photos before necessarily.
No, there's about 84 pictures. I had about 6 donations. So I did about 78 myself. I had the world's best camera all the time. I learned how to use it in a basic sense, and Pitney loved my pictures, and he used them in his concert tour programs, and he asked me to send him pictures that he could keep. And you see, when you've got a picture of him on stage, I'm competing against lots of other people who've taken that picture, but I don't know anyone in the world who's taken pictures of him in his recording studio in his house.
Yeah, there's some lovely snaps in there. You yourself have got a great collection of his work. It's pretty vast, isn't it?
Like a few other collectors, I've got joint best record collections in the world. Well, I haven't just got all the original releases. I've got some acetates and some recordings of records that were made that were never released.
Gosh. Now, how can people get hold of a copy of the book if they want to?
It's £15. Best thing to do is to write to my email address, mturner217@aol.com. Everybody who's read the book is well satisfied, and even Pitney experts tell me they've learned something.
Lovely. I think it's a great book. You should be proud of it. Thank you for coming in today, Michael. The book is called Charting the Life of Gene Pitney. If you want a copy, you can email Michael, mturner217@aol.com. Thank you for coming in. Nice to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Something's gotten hold of my heart, keeping my soul and my senses apart. Something's gotten into my life, cutting its way through my dreams like a knife, turning me up, turning me down, making me smile and making me frown. In a world that was small, I once lived in a time that was peace with no trouble at all. But then you came my way, and a feeling unknown shook my heart, made me want you to stay. All of my nights and all of my days. Yeah, I gotta tell you now, something's gotten hold of my hand, dragging my soul to a beautiful land. Now something has invaded my night, painting my sleep with the colors so bright, changing the gray, changing the blue, scarlet for me and scarlet for you.
Gene Pitney there, and Something's Got a Hold on My Heart. This is the earlier version without Mark Almond, of course. My thanks to Michael Turner for coming in. He did say you can get his book on eBay, and it will be on Amazon in the months to follow. It's called Gene Pitney, Charting the Life of Gene Pitney by Michael Turner. If you want to contact Mike, it's mturner217@aol.com. If you've got any questions about Gene Pitney or about his Francis Drake travels, that is the way to contact him. And as he said, the book is available on eBay and will be on Amazon at some point in the future.